There is a particular kind of person you have probably met once or twice in your life, and if you met them, you have not forgotten them. You knew them once, years ago, maybe in college, maybe at an old job, maybe in a city you no longer live in. They were ordinary at the time, not unimpressive, but not yet what they were going to become. You lost touch the way people lose touch, through nothing dramatic, just the slow drift of separate lives. And then, sometime later, 3 years, 7 years, 15 years, you ran into them again. And the person standing in front of you was not the person you had known. It is hard to describe exactly what was different. The face was the same. The voice was the same. The basic biographical facts were the same. But something had happened to them in the years you had not seen them, and the something was visible in a way that did not have a name. There was a stillness in them that had not been there before, a density, a quality of attention that made you feel, in their presence, simultaneously seen with unusual accuracy and also slightly off balance, as if the version of yourself you were used to performing was no longer quite the version they were responding to. They were warm. They were not cold. But they were no longer manageable in the way they had once been manageable, and you could feel it within 30 seconds of standing in front of them. The person you had known had been replaced, in the years of their absence, by someone you did not yet have the equipment to read. This essay is about that person, about what actually happened to them in the years you did not see them, about the specific and consistently recurring process that produces the unrecognizable version of a human being, the version that walks back into a room a different shape than the one that left it. Because what happened to them is not an accident, and it is not a personality trait, and it is not luck. It is something, a thing with a structure, a predictable arc, and a price that almost no one is willing to pay. And the people who have paid it walk through the rest of their lives carrying something that the people who refuse to pay it will never have, and will never quite understand when they encounter it. The first thing to know about these people is that they did not become unrecognizable by addition. They did not, during the years of their disappearance, accumulate a set of new skills or qualifications or experiences that they then welded onto their existing self. That is the conventional model of growth, and it is the model the modern world endlessly promotes, that you become more by acquiring more, by adding to what you already are, by accumulating layers of competence and credential and curated experience that thicken the existing self into a more impressive version of itself. That model produces a certain kind of person, and that kind of person is everywhere, and they are not what we are talking about. The people who come back unrecognizable did the opposite. They did not add. They subtracted. They went through a period, usually somewhere between 2 and 7 years, sometimes longer, occasionally shorter, in which something they had been carrying without knowing they were carrying it began to come apart. The structure of their old self, which had been built over decades of inheritance and adaptation and accumulated approval-seeking, began to dissolve. Not all at once, not dramatically, slowly, layer by layer, in a process that they themselves could rarely articulate even while it was happening. They lost interests they had genuinely held. They became unable to maintain relationships they had thought were central to their lives. They found themselves disengaging from career trajectories they had spent years investing in. The old motivations stopped firing. The old satisfactions stopped satisfying. The old self, which had functioned more or less smoothly for most of their adult life, began to come apart in their hands. To anyone watching from the outside, this looked like decline. To anyone watching with the assumptions of the modern world, this looked like a person losing their way. And those assumptions are so universally held that even the person going through the process usually held them too. They thought they were failing. They thought something was wrong with them. They thought they needed to get back on track, find their motivation again, push through, get over it. And they tried, often for years, to push the old self back into operation, the way you might try to restart an engine that is grinding to a halt. The old self refused. The old self had finished its work, and the old self was leaving, whether they understood it or not, whether they wanted it to or not. And what they were experiencing as breakdown was, in fact, the necessary first phase of the only kind of transformation that produces an unrecognizable human being. There is a name for this process in the depth tradition, and the name comes from the oldest layer of human storytelling. It is called the Night Sea Journey. The image is ancient, the hero swallowed by the great fish, the descent into the underworld, the sun disappearing into the western horizon before its return, and the image appears in some form in nearly every mythology that any culture ever produced. The recurrence is not a coincidence. It is what the depth tradition recognized as the unconscious encoding into mythology of a psychological process so universal and so important that humans needed a language for it, even before they had the conceptual vocabulary to describe what was happening to them. The Night Sea Journey is the descent, the disappearance, the dissolution of the old self in a darkness from which there is no guarantee of return. And it is what the people who came back unrecognizable went through, even if they did not know that was what was happening to them at the time. The descent has stages, and the stages are surprisingly consistent across the people who have lived through it. The first stage is the loss of motivation. The things that used to drive them stop driving them. The career goals, the lifestyle goals, the relational goals, all the engines that had powered their forward motion lose their fuel. They wake up one morning, or maybe many mornings in a row, and discover that they cannot summon the energy for the life they have been living. It is not depression in the clinical sense, although it is sometimes diagnosed as such. It is something else. It is the withdrawal of psychic investment from a structure that has begun to be obsolete. The energy was holding the old self together. The energy is now needed somewhere else. And until the somewhere else becomes clear, the person feels only the absence of the energy from where it used to be, and concludes naturally that they have lost something they need to get back. The second stage, which often overlaps with the first, is the unraveling of the relational structure. The friendships that were built on shared activities and shared identities begin to feel hollow. The romantic relationship that was working starts working less. The professional connections that were lubricated by shared ambition feel suddenly transactional. The person does not always realize what is happening. They often think the problem is the other people, the friend has become boring, the partner has become distant, the colleague has become exhausting. Sometimes the problem really is the other people. But often, the deeper truth is that the relational structure was held together by the version of themselves they are now in the process of losing, and as that version dissolves, the structure built around it dissolves with it. They find themselves alone in rooms they used to feel at home in. They find themselves performing a self that no longer feels like theirs in conversations that used to flow naturally. And the loneliness that begins to settle in is not the loneliness of having no one around. It is the more disorienting loneliness of being surrounded by people who knew the version of you that is no longer there. The third stage is the confrontation with what was hidden. This is the stage that almost no one talks about because it is the hardest to describe and the most uncomfortable to live through. As the old self dissolves and its protective architecture comes down, things that were held in the dark begin to come into view. Old grief that never got grieved. Old anger that never got expressed. Old wounds that were sealed over rather than healed. Parts of the self that had been exiled to keep the old self functional now have no reason to stay exiled, because the old self that exiled them is leaving. And so they rise. They appear in dreams. They appear in moods that have no apparent cause. They appear in physical sensations the person has not had since childhood. They appear in sudden waves of feeling that arrive without warning and leave the person sitting on the floor of a kitchen at 2 a.m, unable to name what is happening to them. A specific term from the depth tradition describes what is happening here, and it is one of the most important concepts in the entire framework. The exiled material that the old self had pushed into the unconscious is sometimes called the shadow. Not because it is evil, but because it is what could not be seen in the light of the old self's consciousness. And the shadow, during the night sea journey, is finally allowed to come up. Not because the person consciously decided to let it up, but because the structure that had been keeping it down is no longer there to keep it down. The descent is, among many other things, the unsealing of the shadow. And the person going through the descent has to encounter, often for the first time in their adult life, the parts of themselves they had spent decades refusing to acknowledge. This is the part of the process that no one signs up for. This is the part that, if anyone had described it accurately in advance, would have caused most people to refuse the descent entirely. But the descent is not refused. The descent simply happens and the person finds themselves in it, and the only choice they have left is whether to go all the way through or to try to escape early. If something in this is starting to resonate, if some part of you recognizes the territory we are describing, take a second now and subscribe. The work we do here is for the ones who have either been through this kind of descent or who suspect, on some level, that they are entering one. The next layers of this go places almost no other channels are willing to go, and you will want to be there when they arrive. The fourth stage of the descent is what gets called, in the depth tradition, the integration. This is the stage that produces the unrecognizable person. After the loss of motivation, after the unraveling of the relational structure, after the confrontation with the shadow material that the old self had exiled, the person begins slowly to do something that no shortcut allows. They begin to claim what they have encountered. They begin to acknowledge, often with reluctance and over years rather than weeks, that the parts of themselves they had refused are also them. That the anger is them. That the grief is them. That the desire is them. That the capacities they had buried because they did not fit the old self's idea of who they were supposed to be are real capacities, available to them, theirs to use. And in claiming what had been exiled, they become, for the first time in their adult life, whole. Not perfect, not finished, but whole in the specific sense that they are no longer at war with halves of themselves they had spent decades trying to keep beneath the floorboards. This wholeness is the thing you can feel when you stand in front of the person who has done this work. It is not a quality they perform. It is not a technique they apply. It is the residue of years of integration, and it produces, in their presence, a specific physical sensation in other people. People who encounter the integrated person often describe feeling, simultaneously, deeply at ease and slightly destabilized. Deeply at ease because the integrated person is not asking anything of them, not performing for them, not needing them to validate any particular version of who the integrated person is. Slightly destabilized because the integrated person's presence makes apparent, by contrast, all the ways in which the people around them are still at war with themselves. The unrecognizable person did not become unrecognizable by becoming more impressive. They became unrecognizable by becoming more whole. And wholeness, in a world of fragments, is the thing that registers as transformation. Let's get specific about what the integration actually does to a person, because the language of wholeness is evocative, but it is not yet concrete. There are several specific shifts that consistently occur in people who have gone through this process, and they explain almost everything you noticed about the person who came back unrecognizable. The first shift is the disappearance of the social performance. The old self was, like most adult selves, running an extensive social performance program in the background of nearly every interaction. The program was monitoring how it was being perceived, calibrating its expressions, adjusting its tone, managing the impression it was making. The program was so deeply automated that the person running it did not know it was running. They thought they were simply being themselves. They were not. They were being a carefully curated version of themselves, optimized for the approval of the people around them. The descent dissolved the program. Not because the person decided to stop performing, but because the underlying self that was being performed by the program no longer existed. The performance had nothing left to perform, and so it stopped, and what came into its place was the strange experience of simply being whoever they were in real time without monitoring. People who meet this person after the dissolution feel the absence of the program in a way they cannot articulate. They feel met instead of managed. They feel seen instead of evaluated. And the experience is so unusual in the modern social environment that it registers as charisma, even though it is the opposite of charisma. It is the absence of performance, not its perfection. The second shift is the disappearance of certain specific anxieties. The old self had been carrying, often without naming, a load of anxieties that came from the structural insecurity of the constructed self. The anxiety about whether they were enough. The anxiety about whether they were doing their life right. The anxiety about being found out, about being seen as a fraud, about having the wrong people discover the wrong things about them. These anxieties had been so constant, so background, that the person had stopped noticing them, the way a person stops noticing the sound of a refrigerator running in the next room. The descent, in dissolving the constructed self, dissolved the anxieties that were specific to that construction. They did not go away because the person learned to manage them. They went away because the thing that was producing them was no longer there. The person who comes back from the descent is often startled to discover that worries which had run their lives for years are simply not present anymore. Not suppressed, not managed, absent. And the absence is one of the most disorienting and most liberating experiences in the entire process. The third shift is the recalibration of what registers as important. The old self had been spending vast amounts of time and energy on things that, in retrospect, did not matter to the person they actually were. Specific career milestones that, the moment they were reached, produced almost no satisfaction. Specific social arrangements that consumed enormous energy and returned almost nothing. Specific narratives about who they were supposed to be that, when they finally let them go, they discovered they had never really believed. After the descent, the person sees their previous life with strange clarity, and one of the things they see is how much of it they spent on things that were not actually theirs. Not theirs in the sense of being aligned with what they actually cared about, what actually animated them, what actually deserved a life. The recalibration is not a loud renunciation of their old values. It is a quiet realization that many of those values had been someone else's, a parent's, a culture's, a peer group's, and that they had been carrying them so long they had forgotten they were borrowed. The realization, once it lands, does not generate dramatic action. It generates a slow, steady reorientation toward a smaller, denser, more specific life, one organized around the things that actually mattered to the person they had become, rather than the broad and impressive life they had been performing. The fourth shift, and perhaps the most consequential, is the alteration of their relationship to time. The old self had lived in a particular relationship to time, the agitated, accelerating, comparing time of the modern world, in which the question was constantly how far along they were, how their pace compared to others, whether they were on schedule for the milestones the culture had assigned to their age. The descent dissolved this relationship to time. It dissolved it because the descent itself happens on a timeline that the agitated time cannot accommodate. You cannot rush a dissolution. You cannot speed up an integration. You cannot project manage a confrontation with your own shadow. The person going through the descent had to learn, often against their own will, to live in a different kind of time. Slower, more patient, attentive to what was actually happening rather than what was supposed to be happening on what schedule. And after the descent, this new relationship to time stayed. It became the texture of their entire experience. They were no longer running. They were no longer comparing. They were no longer late for anything because they were no longer scheduled for anything that had not been scheduled by themselves. This shift, once it has happened in a person, is visible from across a room. It is the stillness you noticed when they walked back into your life. It is what you could not name but felt immediately. These four shifts together, the disappearance of the social performance, the dissolution of the constructed anxieties, the recalibration of importance, and the alteration of time, produce the person you did not recognize. The person is not a more polished version of who they used to be. The person is a fundamentally different organization of the same biographical material, an architecture rebuilt from the foundation rather than from the cosmetic layer. And no quick technique, no weekend retreat, no productivity hack, no positive thinking, no surface-level intervention can produce this. The only thing that produces it is the actual descent. Undergone, lived through, brought to completion rather than escaped halfway. And here is the part that needs to be said honestly, because if we do not say it, we are romanticizing something that should not be romanticized. The descent is dangerous. Not every person who enters it comes back. Not every person who comes back integrated. Some come back diminished, having lost the old self without finding a new one, and they spend the rest of their lives in a low-grade limbo of a self that is no longer what it was but has not become what it could have been. The path is real, and the path has casualties, and pretending otherwise would be one of the cruelest possible lies to tell anyone considering it. The honest truth is that the descent demands more than the person entering it knows it will demand, and that the determination to go all the way through is the thing that separates the people who come back unrecognizable from the people who come back simply broken. So how do you tell the difference when you encounter someone who has been through it? How do you distinguish the integrated, unrecognizable person from the merely broken one? There are, in fact, fairly reliable signals, and the people who have done the work can usually read them in each other within minutes. The first signal is the quality of attention. The integrated person can give you their full attention without performing the giving of it. The broken person, if they can attend at all, either overattends in a way that feels like neediness or underattends in a way that feels like absence. The integrated attention is steady, undivided, and unattached to any particular outcome. The second signal is the relationship to silence. The integrated person can sit in silence without filling it, and can let others sit in silence without rescuing them from it. The broken person either avoids silence with noise or collapses inside it. The third signal is the response to provocation. The integrated person, when pushed, does not bend toward the push or away from it. They remain where they were, neither escalating nor evading, with a kind of structural stability that the broken person, who oscillates between collapse and defense, simply cannot produce. The fourth signal is what they no longer need. The integrated person does not need to convince you of anything, does not need to be admired, does not need to be agreed with, does not need to position themselves relative to you. The broken person still needs all of these things, and the needs leak out of every interaction, often in disguised forms that they themselves do not recognize. When you encounter the integrated, unrecognizable person, you are encountering someone who has, against all the cultural pressure not to, gone through something that almost no one in the modern world goes through to completion. They have allowed an old self to die. They have stayed in the dark long enough to let what was hidden in it come up. They have claimed what they encountered there, even when claiming it was costly. And they have rebuilt themselves from the bottom of the foundation, slowly, without the modern shortcuts, and without anyone watching them do it. The result is rare. The result is what you felt in their presence and could not name. The result is, for those who have done the work themselves, immediately recognizable as one of their own, and for those who have not, an unsettling encounter with a way of being human that they did not know was available. There is one more thing to say, and it is the thing that turns this entire essay from an interesting observation into something you can use. The descent is not reserved for special people. The descent is available to anyone who is willing to enter it. It is not pleasant, and it is not free, and it is not for everyone. But the door is not locked, and the door has been there in your life, possibly for some time, possibly already opened. The signs that you are near the door are exactly the signs we described at the beginning. The loss of motivation for the life you have been living. The strange thinning of relationships that used to feel solid. The sense that the old self is no longer fitting the actual shape of you. The pull toward solitude that you have been resisting because the culture has told you that solitude is suspect. If you are experiencing these, you may be standing in front of the door. The descent may already be calling you. And the only question is whether you will refuse it, the way the culture trains you to refuse it, or whether you will allow it to take you down into the work that produces the people who come back unrecognizable. The choice, when it arrives, does not feel like a choice. It does not announce itself. It will not look like a single decision made at a single moment. It will look like a slow series of small refusals to keep performing the old self, a gradual willingness to sit with the discomfort of what is dissolving, a quiet decision, repeated daily, to not flee back to the safety of what is no longer real. Most people refuse. The refusal feels reasonable in the moment. It almost always does. And the people who refuse return to their lives, sometimes for many more years, sometimes forever, performing the old self that is no longer them, accumulating the achievements and milestones the culture rewards, and arriving at the end of their lives with the strange and unmistakable sense that they did not, in some essential way, live. The people who do not refuse, who walk into the descent and stay in it, pay a price that the refusers do not pay. They lose people. They lose certainty. They lose the simple sense of where they fit. And what they gain, on the other side, is the only thing that anyone who has been through it considers worth what was paid for it. They gain a self, the actual self, not the constructed one, the one that was always under the floorboards, waiting for the construction above to come apart so it could finally come up into the air. This is what happened to the person you ran into years later and did not recognize. They went down. They stayed down long enough. They came back with what was actually theirs. And the rest of their life, from that point forward, was the life of someone who had paid the price of becoming themselves, and who would not, for any amount of comfort or status or convenience, ever again be willing to live as anyone else. If something in this reached the place that the noise usually drowns out, do something now. Comment with these 4 words. I felt the door. Just that. Let me know how many of us are standing near it. And if this video moved something in you, give it a like, not for me, but as a small acknowledgement to yourself that you noticed. The next video continues into what happens when you actually walk through the door, the early hours of the descent, the first stage of the work, and what to do when the old self begins to come apart in your hands. I will see you there.